May 1992. Manuela Escobar, 8 years old, sat at the kitchen table in one of her father's safe houses outside Medellin, drawing a picture with colored pencils. She was drawing Papa's favorite place, as she'd written at the top of the page in her careful child's handwriting. The picture showed a white house with a red roof, surrounded by trees and flowers, with a small lake in front and mountains in the background. It was a beautiful drawing for an 8-year-old, detailed and colorful, and full of the innocent love a daughter has for her father. Manuela was proud of it. She wanted to show it to her father when he came home that evening, wanted to see him smile the way he always did when she made him something. She had no idea that this drawing, this simple childhood picture, would lead the FBI and Colombian authorities to one of Pablo Escobar's most valuable secret locations, would result in the seizure of $500 million in cash and assets, would become one of the most famous pieces of evidence in the hunt for Pablo Escobar, and would haunt Manuela for the rest of her life as the moment she accidentally betrayed her father. Manuela Escobar was born in 1984, Pablo's second child and only daughter. She was named after one of Pablo's favorite songs, and from the moment she was born, she was the center of Pablo's world in a way that even his son Juan Pablo was. Pablo loved both his children fiercely, would do anything for them, would kill for them without hesitation. But Manuela was special. She was his little girl, his princess. The one person in his life who saw him not as a drug lord or a criminal or a monster, but just as Papa, the man who read her bedtime stories, who played with her dolls, who carried her on his shoulders, who made her laugh, who promised her that everything would always be okay. And Pablo tried to keep that promise, tried to give Manuela a normal childhood, despite the fact that they were constantly on the run, constantly moving from safe house to safe house, constantly hiding from the police and the DEA and the Colombian government. He hired private tutors so she could continue her education, bought her toys and books and art supplies, made sure she had friends to play with, other children of cartel members, carefully vetted and supervised, created a bubble of normalcy around her so she wouldn't have to know about the violence and the fear and the death that surrounded their family. Manuela knew her father was important, knew he was rich, knew that people were looking for him, but she didn't understand why, didn't understand what he'd done. Didn't understand that her father was responsible for thousands of deaths, for flooding America with cocaine, for corrupting Colombia's institutions. To her, he was just Papa, and she loved him completely. In May 1992, when Manuela was 8 years old, the family was staying in a safe house in the hills outside Medellin. Pablo was under intense pressure. The Colombian government had formed a special task force to hunt him down. The DEA had agents in Colombia working with local authorities. Los Peeps, a vigilante group formed by Pablo's enemies, was killing his associates and bombing his properties. Pablo was running out of safe places to hide, running out of people he could trust, running out of time. But he tried not to let Manuela see his stress, tried to be the same loving father he'd always been, even though he knew the walls were closing in. One afternoon, Manuela's tutor, a young woman named Sophia who'd been hired to teach Manuela reading and math and art, gave her an assignment: draw your favorite place. It was meant to be a simple exercise in creativity and self-expression. Sophia had no ulterior motive. She was just trying to keep an 8-year-old girl engaged in learning while the world around them was falling apart. Manuela thought about the assignment carefully. Her favorite place wasn't the safe house where they were staying. It was cramped and dark, and she wasn't allowed to go outside. It wasn't any of the other safe houses they'd stayed in over the years. They all blurred together in her memory. Her favorite place was somewhere she'd only been a few times, but it had made such an impression on her that she thought about it constantly, dreamed about it, wished she could go back there. It was a property her father owned in the mountains, a beautiful white house with a red tile roof, surrounded by gardens and trees, with a small lake where ducks swam and where Manuela had fed them bread the last time they visited. There were horses in a stable, peacocks that wandered the grounds, a swing set that Pablo had installed just for her. It was the most beautiful place Manuela had ever seen, and more importantly, it was the place where Papa seemed happiest, where he relaxed, where he smiled and laughed and played with her without constantly looking over his shoulder, where he seemed like just a regular father instead of a man being hunted by the entire world. So Manuela drew that place, drew it from memory, with all the detail an 8-year-old could manage. The white house with its distinctive red roof, the gardens with their specific arrangement of flowers. She remembered there were roses near the front door and bougainvillea climbing the wall. The lake with its small dock, the mountains in the background with their particular shape, the stable where the horses lived. She even drew the peacocks, little blue and green birds that she was very proud of. At the top of the page, she wrote in careful letters, Papa's Favorite Place by Manuela Escobar. She showed the drawing to Sophia when she was finished. Sophia praised it. It really was a lovely drawing, detailed and colorful and clearly made with love. She asked Manuela about the place in the picture. Was it real? Had Manuela been there? Manuela nodded enthusiastically and told Sophia all about it. About the ducks and the horses and the peacocks. About how happy Papa was there. About how she wished they could go back. Sophia smiled and nodded and asked if she could take a photo of the drawing to show Manuela's mother later. Manuela said yes. She was proud of her work, wanted everyone to see it. Sophia took a photo with a small camera she kept in her bag. Then she gave the drawing back to Manuela, who carefully put it in her folder to show her father when he came home. And that should have been the end of it. A simple school assignment. A child's drawing of a happy memory. Except Sophia wasn't just a tutor. She was also an informant for the Colombian National Police. Sophia had been recruited 6 months earlier. The police had approached her with an offer: work as a tutor for Pablo Escobar's daughter, gain the family's trust, and report back anything useful. In exchange, they'd pay her more money than she'd make in 10 years of teaching, and they'd protect her family from retaliation. Sophia had said yes. Not because she was particularly brave or particularly patriotic, but because she needed the money. Her mother was sick. Her father had debts. The police were offering a way out. So she'd taken the job, had passed the cartel's background checks, had become Manuela's tutor, and for 6 months, she'd reported back to her police handler with information that was mostly useless. Details about the safe houses they stayed in. But by the time she reported them, the family had already moved. Names of bodyguards and associates. But no one important enough to matter. Schedules and routines. But Pablo was too paranoid to keep consistent schedule. The police had been getting frustrated, had been pressuring Sophia to get something useful, or they'd stop paying her. And then Manuela drew that picture. And Sophia recognized it for what it was. A detailed description of a location that Pablo valued enough to call his favorite place. A location that Manuela had been to recently enough to remember it. A location that might still be in use. A location that could contain evidence, or money, or Pablo himself. Sophia sent the photo to her handler that same evening. The handler forwarded it to the task force hunting Pablo. And within hours, analysts were studying the drawing, trying to identify the location. They had Manuela's description: mountains, a lake, gardens, a white house with a red roof. They had the drawing itself with its specific details. And they had databases of properties that Pablo was known to own or have connections to. They started cross-referencing, looking for properties in mountainous areas, properties with lakes, properties with white houses, and within 2 days, they'd identified a map. The property was in the mountains east of Medellin, registered under a shell company that the authorities had linked to Pablo's organization. It matched Manuela's drawing almost perfectly. White house with red roof, small lake, gardens, mountain backdrop. The analysts were confident. This was the place. And if it was Pablo's favorite place, if it was somewhere he felt safe enough to bring his daughter, then it might be somewhere he kept valuable assets. Might be somewhere he hid money. Might even be somewhere he was hiding himself. The Colombian National Police, working with DEA agents, organized a raid. They couldn't risk tipping off Pablo, couldn't risk giving him time to move whatever was there. So they moved fast. 3 days after Manuela drew her picture, a team of 50 officers surrounded the property. They expected resistance, expected bodyguards, expected a firefight. But the property was empty. Pablo wasn't there. His family wasn't there. The bodyguards weren't there. Just a skeleton crew of 2 maintenance workers who surrendered immediately. But what the police found inside the house made the raid one of the most successful operations in the hunt for Pablo Escobar. In the basement, hidden behind a false wall, they found a vault. And in that vault, they found $500 million. Not in cash, though there was some cash, about $20 million in U.S. currency. But in assets, gold bars, jewelry, art, bonds, deeds to properties, stock certificates. A treasure trove of Pablo's wealth, hidden in his favorite place, because he thought it was safe, because he thought no one knew about it, because he never imagined that his 8-year-old daughter's innocent drawing would lead the authorities right to it. The seizure made international news. Colombian police seized $500 million in Escobar assets. The newspapers ran stories about the raid, about the vault, about the treasure that had been hidden in the mountains. But they didn't report how the police had found the location. That detail was kept classified. The authorities didn't want to reveal that they had an informant close to Pablo's family, didn't want to put Sophia at risk, didn't want Pablo to know that his daughter's tutor had betrayed him. But Pablo figured it out anyway. He was many things, but he wasn't stupid. The property had been a closely guarded secret. Only a handful of people knew about it, and the timing was suspicious. The raid had happened just days after Manuela had drawn her picture. Pablo questioned Sofia. She denied everything at first, but Pablo had ways of making people talk, and eventually, she confessed, told him about the police, about the photo, about the drawing. Pablo's reaction was not what anyone expected. He didn't kill Sofia, didn't even hurt her. He just fired her, told her to leave and never come back, told her that if he ever saw her again, she wouldn't be so lucky. And then he did something that surprised everyone who knew about the situation. He sat down with Manuela and explained what had happened. Explained that the drawing she'd made had helped the police find one of his property. Explained that sometimes, even when we don't mean to, we can hurt the people we love. Manuela was devastated. She cried for hours, kept saying she was sorry, that she didn't mean to, that she didn't know. Pablo held her and told her it wasn't her fault, told her that she was just a little girl who'd drawn a picture, told her that he could never be angry at her for being innocent. But he also told her something that Manuela would remember for the rest of her life. He said, "Manuela, there are people in this world who will use your love again, who will take the things you care about and turn them into weapons. You have to be careful who you trust. You have to be careful what you share. Because even the smallest thing, even a drawing, can be dangerous in the wrong hands." Manuela didn't fully understand what he meant. She was 8 years old, but she understood that she'd done something that hurt her father, that her innocent drawing had caused problems, and she felt guilty about it for years. Felt like she'd betrayed him. Felt like she'd failed to protect him the way he'd always protected her. The loss of $500 million was a significant blow to Pablo's organization. It wasn't enough to destroy him. He had other resources, other hidden assets scattered across Colombia and beyond. But it hurt. It hurt financially, forcing him to liquidate other assets, to call in debts, to take risks he wouldn't normally take. It hurt strategically, because the raid proved that the authorities were getting closer, that their intelligence was improving, that nowhere was truly safe anymore. And it hurt psychologically, because Pablo had thought that property was secret, had thought it was protected, had thought he could keep at least one place in his life separate from the war, separate from the violence, separate from the constant threat of discovery. The fact that they'd found it, and found it because of his daughter's innocent drawing, shattered that illusion completely, and it made him more paranoid. After the raid, Pablo became even more careful about what he told his family, started limiting the information he shared with Maria Victoria, started keeping his children in the dark about his movements, his plans, his properties, even more careful about where he took them. He stopped bringing Manuela to any of his properties, stopped letting her see anything that could be used against him, even more careful about who he allowed near his children. He fired most of Manuela's tutors and hired new ones, people he'd personally vetted, people whose families he could threaten if they betrayed him. The bubble of normalcy he tried to create for Manuela started to crack. She started to see the fear in her father's eyes when he looked at her, started to understand that they weren't just hiding for fun, weren't just playing a game, started to realize that her father was in real danger, that people were trying to kill him, that every day could be his last. And she started to understand that she'd made it worse, that her drawing had contributed to his fear, that she'd given his enemies a weapon to use against him. She was 8 years old, and she was carrying guilt that no child should have to carry. Pablo tried to reassure her, tried to tell her it wasn't her fault. But Manuela could see the change in him, could see how he looked at her differently now. Not with less love. He still loved her completely, but with more caution, with more awareness that even his innocent daughter could be used against him. And that awareness created a distance between them that had never been there before. A distance that Manuela felt acutely and blamed herself for completely. 18 months later, in December 1993, Pablo Escobar was killed by Colombian National Police on a rooftop in Medellin. Manuela was 9 years old, and the last conversation she'd had with her father, just days before he died, was about the drawing, about how sorry she still was, about how she wished she could take it back. Pablo had told her the same thing he'd told her before. It wasn't her fault. She was just a child. She'd done nothing wrong. But Manuela never quite believed, never quite forgave herself. After Pablo's death, Manuela and her mother and brother fled Colombia. They lived in Argentina under assumed names. Manuela changed her name, tried to build a new life, tried to escape the legacy of being Pablo Escobar's daughter. But she never forgot the drawing, never forgot the guilt she felt, never forgot the lesson her father had taught her about trust and innocence, and how even love can be weaponized. In 2019, 27 years after she drew that picture, Manuela gave her first and only interview to a journalist. She was 35 years old, living in Buenos Aires under a different name, working as a teacher. And when the journalist asked her about her childhood, about her memories of her father, Manuela talked about the drawing. "I was 8 years old," she said. "I drew a picture of a place I loved because my teacher asked me to. I had no idea what would happen. No idea that it would lead the police to my father's property. No idea that I was being used. And for years, I blamed myself. I thought I'd betray my father. I thought I'd failed him. It took me decades to understand that I was just a child, that I was a victim too, that the people who used my drawing, the police, the informant, everyone involved, they were the ones who should feel guilty, not me. They used a child's innocence as a weapon. They turned my love for my father into a tool to hurt him. That's not my fault. That's theirs." The journalist asked, "Do you still have the drawing?" Manuela shook her head. "My father destroyed it. After he found out what happened, he burned it. He said it was too dangerous to keep. But I remember it. I remember every detail. The White House, the red roof, the lake, the peacocks. I remember how happy I was when I was drawing it, how proud I was, how much I loved my father and wanted to make him smile. That's what I try to remember now. Not the guilt, not the consequences, just the love. Just the fact that I was a little girl who loved her father and drew him a picture. That's all it was supposed to be." When asked if she regretted drawing it, Manuela was quiet for a long time. "I regret that it was used the way it was. I regret that my innocence was exploited. But I don't regret loving my father. I don't regret wanting to make him happy. He was a terrible man who did terrible things. I know that now. I've spent my entire adult life coming to terms with who he really was. But he was also my father. And when I was 8 years old, drawing that picture, all I knew was that I loved him. And I can't regret that. I won't regret that. The drawing itself no longer exists. Pablo burned it in 1992, shortly after the raid. But photographs of it survived in police files. And in 2020, when the Colombian government released previously classified documents about the hunt for Pablo Escobar, the photo of Manuela's drawing was included. It became one of the most viewed images in the release. People were fascinated by it, by the innocence of it, by the tragedy of it, by the fact that this simple child's drawing had played a role in one of the biggest drug busts in history. Art historians and psychologists analyzed it, talked about what it revealed about Manuela's relationship with her father, about how children of criminals see their parents, about the innocence of childhood and how it can be exploited. The drawing became famous in a way that Manuela had never wanted. It became a symbol of the collateral damage of the drug war, of the children who suffered because of their parents' crime, of the innocence lost in the hunt for justice. Manuela herself refused to comment further. After her 2019 interview, she retreated from public life completely, changed her name again, moved to a different city, cut off contact with journalists and researchers and anyone interested in her father's legacy. She wanted to be left alone, wanted to live a quiet life away from the shadow of Pablo Escobar, wanted to be known for who she was, not for who her father had been. But the drawing remained. A reminder of a moment in 1992 when an 8-year-old girl drew a picture of her father's favorite place. When innocence and love collided with betrayal and consequence. When a child's art became evidence in a criminal investigation. When Manuela Escobar learned the hardest lesson of her young, that in her father's world, nothing was safe. Not even love. Not even a drawing. Not even childhood itself.